First of all, it's an unconfirmed report published by the New York Times, quoting anonymous sources. We have not yet received, at least at this moment, official verification from the White House. I think we need that. Assuming that it's happened, the argument being heard, according to the New York Times, is that it's to respond to the alleged North Korean troops being in the Kursk Oblast in Russia. The interesting thing about that is that these North Koreans, as far as I can tell, if they're there, have not gone into Ukraine proper. They are there. They would be there and remaining in the Russian Federation. So this is, and their use would be to go after the Ukrainians who are in Kursk and the foreign mercenaries who have tagged along, and to basically eliminate them. So this is really an unnecessary escalation, if it's true, and the ATACMS that are being sought would be once again used only in the Kursk region, as I understand the report. The range on that missile is 200 kilometers or 200 miles, but Ukraine already has drones which can far exceed that distance, and so it's but the ATACMS require U.S. assistance and NATO assistance because of the information flow that is necessary to provide to the flight of the missile. So that necessarily brings in NATO allies and NATO participation in that regard to assist the Ukrainians. So I'm not surprised at it, and I will say this, that if the story is true, I expected something like this only because you have the French and the British also wanting to escalate in order to drag the United States in and lock in the United States to continue to have to provide assistance. I see the motive for the Biden administration going along with it now, again, if the story is true, in order to lock in the incoming Trump administration to not only be committed, but if they change policy direction and Ukraine falls or the Russians prevail in terms of keep retaining the territories that they now occupy, then I think the Biden administration is playing games with the incoming Trump administration to then have the perception that the U.S. and the Trump administration in particular was responsible for the failure of the policy in Ukraine and for the defeat of Ukraine. So I see this brewing as a possibility, and for Biden to allow this, I think he was just handed a talking point and signed off on it, not realizing what the ramifications are. If that's the case, Biden is basically setting up Trump for failure, and that is insidious, and it's wrong, and it does not really reflect the overarching imperative of the national security interest when an outgoing administration does that to an incoming administration, and they should be condemned for it. If the story is true, it would be an escalation. I think it would be limited, but it would not have any effect on the outcome of the war. The war is essentially lost for the Ukrainians. They just haven't acknowledged it yet, and the Russians actually have been constrained or restrained in really applying the hammer. Now they've started something, and there was a huge missile and drone attack, I believe, yesterday or today, and this may intensify. So if this comes to pass, the story is true, then I fully anticipate that the Russian response will not necessarily be aimed at a NATO country per se, but will intensify against Ukraine proper in order to get the Ukrainians ultimately to sue for peace and to negotiate. I think the military decision makers in the Kremlin will probably see that the amount of ATACMS will be very limited because the U.S. doesn't have that many. And also the British and the French have very, very limited storm shadows. And that may be one of the reasons why that Ukraine has been denied that. The U.S. Army is very concerned about their current stockpiles of ATACMS. And as I said, they are a very effective weapon, but they would need to be used and employed by NATO assistance, but I think rather than intensify the war generally that then could conceivably spread into Europe, I think Mr. Putin will instead just hammer down on Ukraine proper, look for where the ATACMS stockpiles are, and blow those up. So, in order to, and then force Kiev into a position of having to ultimately go down the road of seeking a negotiated settlement. But I think it's all or nothing now. I think the Russia will intensify against Ukraine. They need to basically. I think they're going to try to bring this to a conclusion real quickly, and the winter time is going to would be a good time for Russia to act. It also allows Russia to bring in more heavy armor because the ground will be frozen, but at the same time, Ukrainians will be suffering because of their lack of energy infrastructure, and I think that could be a compelling development to get the Kiev government ultimately to want to to sit down for negotiations.